Laura and my in-laws changed the locks while I was in the hospital delivering their grandchild. Not just changed the locks, erased me. They handed my husband a document, told him to sign before I got home, and had my sister-in-law standing in my kitchen by the time I walked through the door holding our newborn. That night, I made 2 phone calls. By morning, I had 31 missed ones. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing they'd been running a quiet campaign against me for 3 years, chipping away at my marriage, my finances, my name on every document that mattered. What did I find when I finally started looking? I'll tell you exactly. I never felt fully welcome in that house. There was always something slightly off. The way my mother-in-law would pause before answering my questions, like she was buying time to decide how much I needed to know. The way my father-in-law would redirect conversations about finances to my husband specifically, even when I was sitting right there at the same table. I chalked it up to a generational thing for a long time. Some families just operated that way. Old-fashioned, traditional. I told myself I was overthinking it. My husband and I had been married for 4 years when I got pregnant. We were living in a 2-bedroom rental in Columbus, Ohio, saving up to buy something of our own. His parents owned a 4-bedroom house about 12 minutes away, and when they offered to let us move in temporarily to save money before the baby came, my husband thought it was generous. I thought it was a little fast, but I agreed, because that's what you do when you're trying to build something together and the math barely works and someone offers a hand. We moved in on a Saturday in late March. By Sunday evening, my mother-in-law had already rearranged the guest bathroom without asking and placed a framed photo of my husband's ex-girlfriend on the hallway shelf between his high school graduation picture and a family portrait from Gatlinburg. When I mentioned it to my husband quietly, privately, he said she probably just forgot it was there. I moved the photo myself. It reappeared the next morning. I didn't say anything the second time. I just noted it. The pregnancy was hard. I was sick for most of the first trimester, working remotely as a billing coordinator for a medical group, trying to keep up with deadlines while also keeping down food. My mother-in-law would bring me tea in the evenings, always chamomile, always with a little honey, and she'd sit at the edge of the bed and ask questions that felt caring but landed strangely. How are you sleeping? Are you having vivid dreams? Do you feel like yourself? I remember thinking the questions were odd, but assuming she was just nervous for her son, projecting worry into conversation. My father-in-law was quieter. He had that particular kind of confidence that doesn't need volume. He ran a small property management company with his brother, and everything about him communicated that he was used to being the final word in any room. He was perfectly civil to me. That's the right word. Civil. Not warm. Not unkind. Just civil, in a way that kept me at exactly the distance he'd decided I should stand. Somewhere around my 7th month, I started noticing small things missing. A folder of printed bank statements I'd left on the desk in our room. A copy of our lease agreement I'd been keeping for reference since we'd need it for mortgage pre-approval paperwork. I assumed I'd misplaced them. Pregnancy brain is real. I moved on. 2 weeks before my due date, my husband came home from dinner with his parents looking different. Not upset exactly. Unsettled. I asked him what was wrong, and he said his dad had mentioned some things about the property deed on a small piece of land his grandfather had left him in eastern Tennessee. Family land. About 2 acres. Not worth a fortune, but meaningful. The kind of thing that gets passed down with the unspoken instruction that it stays in the family. His father wanted him to put it in a family trust, rather than letting it sit jointly in our names once we married into shared assets. My husband said he thought it might be a good idea. I asked if I'd be included in the trust. He didn't answer right away. That pause told me something I wasn't ready to hear yet. I went into labour on a Tuesday morning in November. Early, fast, more intense than the books prepared me for. My husband drove me to Riverside Methodist, and by that evening I'd had our daughter. 7 pounds 2 ounces. She made a sound like she was already annoyed at the world, and I loved her immediately and completely. My husband cried. I cried. The nurse brought us both juice and crackers, and for a few hours the room felt like the only real place on earth. We stayed 2 nights. On the second afternoon, My mother-in-law came to visit and held the baby for 40 minutes without once asking if I needed anything. My father-in-law shook my husband's hand. Nobody brought me flowers. I noticed but told myself I was being petty. When we got home, the house felt different. Not the temperature, not the light. Something else. A shift I couldn't name immediately. My sister-in-law was there, which surprised me because she lived in Cincinnati and hadn't mentioned visiting. She was in the kitchen making a casserole, and she smiled when she saw me. But it was the same smile as her father. Civil. Measured. I asked my husband later that night why she was there. He said his mum had invited her for the week to help out. I said that would have been nice to know beforehand. He said he forgot to mention it. The baby was 2 days old and I was too exhausted to push further, so I let it go. The next morning I went to find the folder where I kept our important documents. The folder I'd specifically packed and kept on my side of the closet shelf. Insurance cards, our marriage certificate, the paperwork from opening a joint savings account when we moved in together. It wasn't there. I looked on both shelves, in the bedside drawer, under the bed. I asked my husband. He said he hadn't touched it. I asked my mother-in-law. She tilted her head like I'd said something confusing and said she hadn't seen any folder like that. I told myself I was sleep-deprived. I told myself I'd find it later. I didn't find it later. But I did find something else. A week after we got home, my husband sat me down at the kitchen table with that same unsettled look from the month before, only heavier this time. His parents were in the living room. His sister was upstairs with the baby. He slid a document across the table, a postnuptial agreement. I don't know if you've ever had that specific experience of reading something and understanding every word individually but needing several seconds for the meaning to fully arrive. That's what happened to me. I read it twice. It would have removed my name from any joint financial interest in his family-originated assets, limited my inheritance rights if he died, and set terms that were, to put it plainly, more favourable to his family than to me. A line near the bottom said the agreement had been drafted with input from a family advisor. There was no mention of my having a lawyer review it. I looked up at my husband. He said his dad thought it was just smart planning. He said it wasn't personal. I asked him when this had been drafted. He said before the baby came. I asked why he was showing it to me now, when I was 1 week postpartum and hadn't slept more than 3 hours consecutively since Tuesday. He didn't have a good answer for that. I didn't sign it. I told him I needed time, and I stood up and went upstairs and held my daughter and stared at the ceiling. That night, when everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop. I started going through our shared accounts just quietly, methodically, the way you do when something feels wrong and you can't sleep anyway. What I found took about 20 minutes to start making sense, and another hour to fully absorb. Over the past 8 months, a series of transfers had moved money from our joint savings into an account I didn't recognise. Not huge amounts each time. Enough to look like routine expenses if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention now. The total was just over $11,000. I sat with that number for a long time. I didn't wake my husband. I took screenshots of everything, emailed them to myself from a personal account they didn't have access to, and went to sleep, because my daughter would need to eat in 2 hours, and I needed to be functional. The following week, I told my husband I needed to visit a friend in Westerville for an afternoon, just a few hours out, just to breathe. He said fine. I didn't go to Westerville. I drove to a law office on North High Street, where a family law attorney and someone I'd found through a recommendation from a college friend took a 2-hour consultation with me. I brought my screenshots. I brought the postnuptial document. I brought the notes I've been quietly keeping in a notes app on my phone going back 6 weeks. She looked at everything carefully. Then she looked at me and said, "This is a pattern, not an accident." She told me about discovery rights, about financial transparency in marriage, about what constituted coercive document signing. She gave me a list of things to do before I made any move. Get copies of everything you can access legally. Document any instance of restricted access to shared property. Keep records of all communications. Do not sign anything. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not relief. Something steadier than relief. Clarity. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I was nursing a newborn, living in my in-laws' house, folding laundry and making small talk over dinner and thanking my mother-in-law for the casseroles she kept leaving on the counter, while quietly building a file that told a very different story about this family than the one they'd spent years composing. I found out about the land trust paperwork through a document my husband had left open on the shared printer. His name only. Notarized 3 weeks before our daughter was born. I photographed it and said nothing. I found out about the email thread between my father-in-law and his brother through an account sync error on the iPad they kept in the kitchen for recipes. My father-in-law had forgotten to sign out of his email. I didn't snoop through it, but a thread's subject line was visible in the preview pane. It read, "Getting her off the title before it becomes an issue." I took a photo of the screen. Then I closed the iPad and washed the dishes. I found out about my mother-in-law's conversation with my OB's office when I called to schedule my 6-week postpartum visit, and the receptionist mentioned that someone had called earlier that week asking about my records. The receptionist had correctly declined to share anything, but she mentioned it because she thought I should know someone had tried. When I asked who had called, she said the person had identified herself as my mother. I don't speak to my mother. My mother-in-law knew that. I think about that moment sometimes, standing in the driveway in December, phone pressed against my ear, baby in the carrier on my chest, realizing that the woman who brought me chamomile tea and asked how I was sleeping had tried to access my medical records by pretending to be my estranged mother. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the cold until my daughter started fussing, and then I went back inside and put her down for a nap. I called my attorney that afternoon from my car with the engine running. She told me we were ready. I told her I needed 2 more days. I had one more thing I needed to find first. The folder with our original documents turned up in the bottom of a filing cabinet in my father-in-law's office, inside a hanging file labelled miscellaneous, which was not locked, but was clearly not meant for me. My marriage certificate was there, our joint account paperwork, a copy of my social security card that I'd never given anyone permission to copy. I photographed every page. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. I thanked my mother-in-law for dinner that night and helped clear the table. 2 days later, on a Wednesday morning, I packed a bag while my father-in-law was at his office and my mother-in-law was at her book club. I packed my daughter's things, our documents, my laptop, 3 days of clothes for each of us. I texted my husband, "I need us to meet tonight. Somewhere neutral, not the house." He texted back, "Is everything okay?" I said no, but it will be. I drove to my college roommate's apartment in Dublin. She opened the door, looked at me and the baby and the bags and said nothing except "Come in," and "I love you," and "The guest room is made up." I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. My husband came to Dublin that evening. We sat at my roommate's kitchen table and I showed him everything. The screenshots, the land trust paperwork, the document from the printer, the photo of the iPad email thread, the information about the call to my OB's office, the folder contents. He was quiet for a long time, not defensive, not dismissive, just quiet in the way that means something is being rearranged inside a person. When he finally spoke, he said he didn't know about the medical records call. I believed him. He said he'd known about the account transfers and had been told it was for a home repair fund he'd have access to. I asked him who told him that. He said his dad. We talked for 3 hours. It was not easy, but it was honest in a way we hadn't been in probably a year. The kind of honest that's painful, precisely because it means you've both been avoiding something real. At the end of it, my husband called his father. I sat across the table and listened. It was a short call. My husband told him he knew about the transfers and he wanted every dollar returned to the joint account within 30 days. He told him I would not be signing the postnuptial agreement. He told him that the land, when it was dealt with, would be dealt with by us, together with our own attorney. His father started talking about loyalty and family decisions and protecting assets, and my husband said, "She is my family," and hung up. I will keep that moment for the rest of my life too. The 30 missed calls started that night. His father called 6 times before midnight. His mother called 4 times. His sister called twice. 3 unknown numbers called and left no voicemails. By the next morning there were more. Some left and there were more. Some left messages. Some didn't. The ones that left messages alternated between concerned and threatening in a way that made the pattern very clear. My attorney sent a formal letter that Friday. It outlined the financial discrepancy, referenced the attempted medical records access, and noted that any further contact intended to pressure either party regarding legal or financial decisions would be documented and could be considered harassment. The calls stopped the following afternoon. The next few weeks were complicated in the practical way that real things are complicated, not dramatic, just slow and sometimes tedious and requiring a lot of phone calls to banks and a lot of paperwork and a lot of evenings sitting at my roommate's kitchen table with lukewarm coffee going over documents while my daughter slept in the next room. The transfers were reversed. Took longer than 30 days, and my attorney had to send a second letter, but they were reversed. Every dollar. My husband and I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville. We signed the lease together, both our names. I have a copy. His sister called me once, about 6 weeks after everything, and said she hoped I understood that the family had only been trying to protect their son. I told her I understood that was how they'd framed it to themselves, and that I hoped one day she'd be in a marriage where someone chose her the way she'd expect to be chosen. I wasn't cruel about it, I wasn't warm either. I was just honest. She didn't call again. His parents sent a card at Christmas. I don't know what it said because I didn't open it. I put it in a folder I labelled documented and moved on. My mother-in-law texted me in January, said she missed her granddaughter and hoped we could find a way to repair things. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the chamomile tea with the honey. I thought about the questions about my sleep. I thought about the phone call to my OB's office. I texted back that supervised visits could be arranged to my husband and that any conversation about a broader relationship would need to start with an acknowledgement of what had happened. She didn't respond. My father-in-law never contacted me directly. I wasn't surprised. There's a particular kind of loneliness in realising that people you shared a home with, people who held your newborn daughter, people who made you tea, were running a careful, patient campaign to make sure you never fully landed, that you were always meant to be temporary in their version of the story. I spent some time being angry about it. I spent some time being sad about it. Then I spent time doing something more useful, which was making sure that every document with my name on it was exactly where it needed to be in my name with my signature, filed correctly, backed up in 2 places. My husband and I go to couples therapy on Thursday evenings. Our daughter is 8 months old now and has opinions about everything which seems right. We're saving for a house again. This time the math is cleaner because there are no arrangements I'm not fully aware of. I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago, someone who'd been through something similar with a controlling family situation, and she said something that stayed with me. She said the thing that finally helped her wasn't the documentation or the legal letters or even the reverse transfers. It was the moment she stopped trying to be the kind of person they'd approve of and started just being herself. Loudly and without apology. I thought about that for a while, and then I bought a chipped coffee mug at a thrift store in Clintonville, one with a small flaw along the rim that the previous owner had apparently found unacceptable, and I drink my coffee out of it every morning. It's my favourite mug I've ever owned. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make themselves fit into a frame someone else built. I spent 4 years doing that. I'm done shrinking. This is my story. My name on my documents, my daughter in my arms, my apartment, my life. They thought they were cutting me out of the picture. All they did was give me room to build a bigger one. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in any abstract way, just in the plain practical sense of actions have weight, and weight always lands somewhere eventually. My in-laws spent 3 years being careful about what they said in front of me, careful about how they moved money, careful about which documents disappeared and when. They were patient, and I'll give them that. They built something slowly, the way you build a trap, small piece by small piece, until the thing is already around you before you realise you're inside it. They thought patience was the same as power. It isn't. Patience is just time. What you do with the time is what matters. What I did with mine was pay attention. I think about the chamomile tea a lot. The way my mother-in-law would sit on the edge of the bed and ask how I was sleeping, whether I felt like myself. I took that for concern for years. Looking back, I think it was assessment. She was checking what I knew, what I suspected, how close I was getting. The kindness was a tool, same as the documents in the filing cabinet and the account transfers and the call to my OB's office. All of it was in service of the same quiet goal, which was to make sure I never fully landed, to keep me just off balance enough that I wouldn't look too closely at the foundation. What they miscalculated was this. I was a billing coordinator. I spent 8 hours a day looking for discrepancies in financial records. Finding things that didn't add up was literally my job. They brought me into their house and fed me tea and thought I wasn't paying attention. I was always paying attention. But here's the thing I've had to sit with. The part that's harder to say. I let it go on longer than I should have, because I wanted to believe the best about the people my husband loved. That's not stupidity. That's what you do when you're trying to build a life with someone, and you understand that his family is part of what you're building around. I kept explaining things away because the alternative, that this was deliberate, organised, patient, was too heavy to carry while also being pregnant and working full-time and trying to make a new place feel like home. What I know now is that explaining things away is its own kind of cost. Every time I told myself it was probably nothing, I gave them a little more time. And time was the one resource they needed most. What changed everything wasn't a dramatic moment. It was just a Tuesday night when I couldn't sleep and I opened a laptop and started looking at numbers. That's it. No confrontation, no ultimatum, no breaking point. Just a woman and a spreadsheet and enough stillness to finally see what had been there for months. My daughter is 8 months old. She has no idea what happened in those rooms before she came home from the hospital. She just knows the apartment in Clintonville with the light that comes through the kitchen window in the morning and her dad reading to her on the couch and the chipped mug her mother drinks coffee from every day. That's her whole world right now, and it is clean and honest and entirely ours. I didn't win because I was smarter than them or braver than them. I won because I stopped waiting for permission to protect myself. That's the only thing. You can have all the documentation in the world and it means nothing until you decide you're worth defending. The moment I walked into that law office on North High Street with a folder of screenshots and said, "Here is what is happening to me. Please help me understand my options," that was the moment the whole thing shifted. Not because of the lawyer, because of the decision to walk through the door. Some people build walls and call it family. I spent years trying to find a door in those walls. There wasn't one. So I stopped looking and I built something with an open floor plan instead. My name on the lease. My name on the account. My daughter's middle name chosen by me, for reasons that belong entirely to us. They thought they were writing me out of a story. They just handed me a blank page.